During my visit to the Johnson Space Center, this is a moment that I will simply never forget. One of the few Saturn V's that was meant to go to the moon on display in the world. And yet it made me feel a little bit sad because it brought to mind a particular memory that anybody who's into space should remember.
I therefore ask the Congress, above and beyond the increases I have earlier requested for space activities, to provide the funds which are needed to meet the following national goals. First, I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space, and none will be so difficult or expensive to accomplish.
But accomplish it we did with this mammoth rocket of 3 stages. The first stage, which you're seeing the front of right now, powered by 5 F1 engines that many say will never be equaled again. 7,500,000 pounds worth of thrust from 5 engines, as opposed to the 5 million or so pounds of thrust provided by 27 engines from the Falcon Heavy. And then the second stage, powered by 5 J2 engines, which used hydrogen and oxygen instead of kerosene and oxygen as the first stage did, providing an additional 1,125,000 pounds worth of thrust, allowing the rocket to achieve an altitude of 185 kilometers, and yet it still wasn't finished. In order to get the tiny little Apollo capsule all the way to the moon, a third stage was required, powered by a single J5 engine. And believe it or not, oh, by the way, you get to see just how mammoth this thing was. It was something to see. But believe it or not, 4 of these third stages are probably still with us somewhere in the solar system, because the third stage of Apollo 8, 10, 11, and 12 were all put into heliocentric orbit, and we actually spotted the third stage of Apollo 12 in 2002, and it will be in an eccentric orbit around our planet for who knows how long, perhaps longer than the future of our species. But what makes me the angriest of all is the fact that the company that was arguably the most responsible for the creation of this technological marvel is now holding us back. Why is that the case? We're gonna find out in just a few minutes. Good evening, and welcome to yet another episode of The Angry Astronaut. As you can tell, I am still here in Boca Chica, and you can pretty much count on daily content from me, whether it be live streams or new videos. Really, I've got nothing else to do here except pump out this content, so this works out really well for my viewers. I hope you've enjoyed what I've been able to roll out thus far, and if you haven't seen a lot of it, there's a lot of things I've seen in Houston and Boca Chica that really are worth checking out. But enough of that. Back to the SLS. One of the reasons that I came down here was in the hopes, the forlorn hope, that I would get a chance to see the Green Run Part 2 on February 25th. Obviously, that's not going to happen now. Once again, it's being delayed, and it's being delayed for an equipment issue, but not a piece of equipment that was in the original design. That is to say, the RS-25 engines are not to blame. It's rather a new piece of equipment that's been introduced by guess who? Boeing. Yes, indeed, them again. And it is such a particular and specified part of equipment. It's just so intrinsically designed for one particular purpose that in order to fix it, they actually had to custom make tools to work on it. Why not make it something more modular, something that is compatible with the rest of the tools that they needed? Nope, that's not the Boeing way, or at least it's not the Boeing way today. And you have to ask yourself, at least I do, how the hell did all of this happen? Because when Kennedy made his famous speech about going to the moon, putting a man on the moon, it was 1969, May of 1969 actually, when Apollo 10 was orbiting the moon. And yet Artemis 1, because of yet another delay, is not going to be orbiting the moon most probably until 2022. And the first launch of the SLS was supposed to occur no later than 2017. Half a decade and billions upon billions of taxpayer dollars. How the hell does this happen when in the past, Boeing was heavily involved, obviously, in the Saturn V, which I showed you in the intro? They got it all done in less than 10 years. Why can't we do that today? Some people would say it's because of money, but it isn't. It's a lot nastier than that, and it's a lot more greed. It's a lot more exploiting taxpayer money and the government procurement process, something that happens with the U.S. military on a regular basis as well. The difference is the U.S. military has hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars to waste on procurement processes and their various old boys networks of companies that take advantage of them. NASA doesn't have this, not even remotely. So they can't afford to be wasting money, and yet they are, and in huge amounts. And as you can see, I believe in Artemis. Very much so. I even think that the Orion really isn't that bad of a ship, and it's all ready to go. It's been ready for a while now, and ironically, it has no rocket to carry it, and it's not going to have a rocket to carry it for God knows how long. How did all of this come about? Well, we're going to learn all of that, all of the sordid details right now. Now, one of the key excuses that an SLS advocate would use in terms of why it's taken so damn long to develop this thing is because this rocket has never had a very clear mission. When it was first conceived, the idea was to design a rocket that was going to go not to the moon, but to deep space, and probably to a near-Earth asteroid first. And by the way, this animation is from my friend Seabass, who produces some incredible animations, every bit as good as anything NASA puts out. I have them linked in the description. Head on over and subscribe. So consequently, NASA set about designing the Orion, which is about 50% heavier as far as dry mass is concerned than the Apollo service module and command module. On top of that, the launch abort system is heavier because it has to carry a lot more weight. So we're looking at a much heavier vessel that needs to go all the way to the moon now that the mission has been changed. And not only that, it can't even land on the moon. So the SLS has a mission that just keeps shifting, and shifted only 4 years ago. So, SLS advocate would argue, NASA was given Mission Impossible, changing the mission of the SLS from going to a near-Earth asteroid to going to the moon with a vessel that was far heavier than Apollo while using roughly the same thrust as the Saturn V, or close to it. how the hell were they supposed to achieve that? Well, NASA hoped to achieve that with a competition, yes indeed, an advanced booster competition that involved several different competitors. Aerojet, which was not yet Aerojet Rocketdyne, Alliance Tech Systems, or what we know as Orbital ATK these days, and Pratt & Whitney Rocketdyne and Dynetics, all of whom came up with very good, very innovative boosters. And they determined in 2013, or NASA did, that all of them were completely viable. And yet, at the same time, the competition was canceled, and they decided to go with a 5-segment booster that ATK had proposed in the first place for this ship. So all of that time and all of that money and this competition completely wasted. And by 2014, it was determined that number one, the project would cost about $7 billion by the time the SLS launched in 2018. Oh yeah, that was number two, the 2018 launch date. If you'll excuse me for a moment, my point is all this time and all these years of research and money were simply wasted in order to go with what NASA defined as a tried and true solution, a booster that was very similar to what was used on the space shuttle, except not reusable and a little bit simpler, 5 segments instead of 7. And upgunned, by the way, as well. But other than that, pretty much space shuttle technology. Why spend all of those years just to use something that you've been using for decades prior to that? It makes no sense, and really it seems to indicate that Orbital ATK just had better influence and better lobbyists in Congress than anybody else did. And speaking of Congress and politics, the United Launch Alliance, of all people, proposed way back in 2012 that a super mega rocket was unnecessary in the first place, that smaller commercial rockets could get the Orion or a smaller vessel of the similar kind up into low Earth orbit, where you could refuel it with a propellant depot or a tanker. Does that sound familiar? Or something along those lines to get it the rest of the way to its destination. And what did this guy, Senator Richard Shelby of Alabama, have to say about that? Well, since most of the work on the SLS was being done in Alabama, and because Senator Shelby has a long-standing relationship with Boeing, they're his best friends as a matter of fact, he did everything he could to stop it. As a matter of fact, he said he would kill the whole human flight program if they talked about fuel depots again. And according to George Sowers, a former employee of ULA who made a statement in 2019, Boeing was so furious about this solution that was proposed by ULA that they tried to get him fired. George Sowers, who is the champion of this whole program. And according to the same article, which I have linked in the description, it set back orbital refueling an entire decade. And herein lies SLS's greatest strength in terms of staying power and, of course, its greatest weakness. It provides an incredible number of jobs across the country, although it does not provide any sort of incentive to move on, like Alabama with engineering testing, Mississippi with further testing, such as the infamous Green Run, which has been canceled again. I'll get to that in a moment. Utah with Orbital ATK and the solid rocket boosters, which were finally chosen after a canceled contract. Florida, for obvious reasons, launch pads, etc. Colorado, further research, further testing, the engines and other things. And then California, immensely powerful states, especially when it comes to their senators and congressmen and the amount of influence that they wield over the budgets. And this explains why the SLS has gobbled up so much of NASA's budget without any incentive to get it completed, because a completed project means the end of important jobs. And it's important to keep this consideration in mind when you're talking about the SLS, because how else do you keep screwing up for so many years with technology that's firmly established and has already been thoroughly tested and used? The solid rocket boosters are from the space shuttle. The RS-25 engines are from the space shuttle. The damn orange tank is from the space shuttle. As a matter of fact, the biggest change that's been made to this rocket is what is at the top, the Orion and the European Service Module, both of which are brand new developments and both of which have been completed. So why has the rest of the rocket not been completed when it's using technology that we've been using for decades? It makes no sense. Well, I take that back. It makes a lot of sense. The way you screw up 50-year-old technology is by adding components that do not work, such as a pre-valve that has caused the cancellation of the green run. NASA has been having problems with this pre-valve that was added to the RS-25 engine, which was, by the way, an extremely reliable engine before Boeing started screwing around with it, and this pre-valve feeds liquid oxygen into the engine, and they've had multiple issues with this, and by the way, after they designed and installed it, they didn't have the necessary tools to repair it. They had to customize tools in order to make those repairs. Why design a pre-valve that's screwed up and so difficult to work on in the first place? It's insane. But that is what's causing the green run delay and what will most probably push the SLS into 2022, if not further. Because if this rocket has problems with little things like this pre-valve, who knows what other problems it has? Because integrated testing has not yet been done on this rocket and will probably never be done. And just because I don't want to spend the entire video talking about problems, I want to bring up a solution as well. And yes, I want to talk about ULA instead of SpaceX. Actually, I'm going to talk about both. But the upcoming ULA Vulcan, which will be coming out this year, is capable of carrying the Orion to orbit inside its existing fairing. It's wide enough and it's long enough in order to carry the Orion to low Earth orbit. At that point, the second stage of the Vulcan Centaur can be refueled. That's right, refueled by another Vulcan in on-orbit refueling. Yes, the Starship could do all of these things too, but the Vulcan is scheduled to come out in 2021 and could very easily carry the Orion up to low Earth orbit and perhaps carry out the mission without SLS. Alright, and then we also have the smart reuse of the engines. I've talked about this before, essentially allowing the engines to be jettisoned from the first stage and reused after they've been picked up via parafoil, reducing the cost of the Vulcan launch to $100 million per launch. So assuming you send up one Vulcan with the Orion, another Vulcan to do the on-orbit refueling, you have an Orion in low Earth orbit ready to go to the moon for $200 million, or 1/5 of the minimum cost of one SLS. But wait a minute, you ULA lover, you. The Vulcan Centaur is not human-rated and probably won't be for years. Well, this is true, but that is also the case with the Falcon Heavy, and the Falcon Heavy still does not have a fairing size large enough to accommodate the Orion, which compounds the problem as far as that rocket is concerned. Now, obviously, the Starship could solve all of these problems, but it's probably not going to achieve orbit until 2022 at the earliest, and NASA probably isn't going to approve it for any sort of practical use for a few years after that. However, what I'm talking about is existing rockets like the Falcon 9 and the Crew Dragon. This capsule could transfer several astronauts into the Orion once it achieves low Earth orbit, and then send it on its way to the moon once it's been properly refueled by another Vulcan Centaur. Now, this all adds up to about $500 million if you take into account SpaceX's charge of $55 million a seat. But still, it's half the cost of the SLS per rocket, and that's assuming it's $1 billion a rocket, which is a very big assumption. And it uses rockets that already exist or will exist this year, as opposed to a rocket that continues to be plagued with problems and, frankly, is expendable and outdated. We need to be looking at more innovative solutions, and certainly there are other solutions besides the one that I've just proposed, but we need something. Otherwise, Artemis may end up being canceled before it even gets started, and nobody, not even Boeing, wants that. So, pretty damn depressing. It's enough to make me really damn angry, to say the least, and it's one of the main reasons that I started this channel in the first place, was seeing the waste that Boeing was putting into the Starliner, the ineptitude, the incompetence, the greed. It really is overwhelming, and I proposed in this video a way for us to get around it, a way that wouldn't even really involve SpaceX, except using the Crew Dragon to get the astronauts up to the Orion in the first place. There are other ways to make this happen, and frankly, even with as far along as the SLS claims to be, I think that we could probably get it accomplished with other rockets quicker. I really am starting to feel that way, because the SLS is continuing to run into problem after problem, and NASA is replacing mission after mission that the SLS was supposed to carry out with commercial rockets. The Europa Clipper now being carried out by a Falcon Heavy, resupply to the Lunar Gateway, the assembly of the Lunar Gateway, both being handled by the Falcon Heavy. If the Dynetics lander gets approved, and dear God, let's hope that it does, being deployed by the Vulcan Centaur, the SLS is hardly doing a damn thing except getting the Orion to the Gateway. And it just seems to me that after all this time and all this expense, and with so little to show for it, somebody else might actually be able to get this job done by 2024. I feel very confident that either SpaceX or ULA could get this job done with the Orion by 2024. Like I say, I laid out just one little plan, a couple of ideas, a couple of suggestions that would still be less expensive than the SLS, multiple rocket launches that would still cost less than the SLS, which indicates just how wasteful and just how unnecessarily expensive this ship is, especially considering that it's using 90% shuttle technology that we should have mastered already. There's no excuse for this except incompetence and greed, and I'm never going to change my position on that. I hope that Artemis gets going. I can't wait for our return to the moon. I can't wait for the first woman to set foot on the moon. I think that that is a significant moment to involve more than half of the population of this planet in the excitement of space. I think that that will be a very, very big moment for our species, for the first woman to set foot on the moon. So many exciting things involved with Artemis, and that's why I have this shirt on. But it isn't going to happen, I don't think, at least not in a sustainable way with the SLS. We need a replacement, whether it be Starship, whether it be another commercial rocket that's coming out that would be able to carry out the job. So if you like the way I tell things and essentially express my opinions and my editorials the way I want to and really damn the consequences because that's my attitude, well, you know how to support me. It's all in the description. So until we're finally on our way back to the moon, regardless of what method we may use, even if it is the SLS, I'll still be happy the moment we at least have the Orion orbiting the moon. But I will be so much more excited when the first human being sets foot on the moon in over half a century. Until that moment happens, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.